Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run. I said that we're playing as Apollyon. So this particular run started out on the right foot because we managed to find Polyphemus. And Polyphemus, I don't have to say it, right? It doesn't need an introduction. It's an amazing item. It's existed here since basically the original, so it's like the granddaddy of items in this game. And it appears very rarely. It's a special item, which means it's already pretty rare, but because there's so many other items in the game, when you do find it, it's like Christmas. It just brings a smile to my face. And about this particular map layout, or at least how this particular one was conceived, I think there are two interesting consequences to that. So the first one is because the treasure room is right next to the spawn room, pretty much everybody is gonna find this item, which I think is great, both from a variance perspective, which means that there's basically no way to miss it, and both from the perspective of everybody needs some Polyphemus in their life. So there's no way you're gonna miss it if you actually know how to play this game to an extent. So you're gonna see the golden border, you're gonna go to the item room, you're gonna see this awesome item and you're gonna pick it up. Now, the second reason, or at least the second consequence I think that this has, is that finding Polyphemus on just basically any run has some interesting consequences, because it's the type of item which is obviously very good, but it also has a very obvious downside, so it takes a lot of your tier delay away, so you start shooting much slower. Now, in some sense, that's not that bad of a thing, but in another sense, it can be. It really depends on all of the other items that you find throughout the run. Now, certain items work really well with it, and certain items don't really, right? One of the items that doesn't tend to work well with Polyphemus, especially in a daily environment, is basically any charging item. So I think something like Monstrous Lung tends to just wreck the synergy. Now, it's obviously very cool, it's very strong. When you do actually charge the shot up, you're pretty much gonna destroy everything in your path. But the fact is, it's gonna take so long to charge that shot up with Polyphemus and Monstrous Lung, because they both have an innate tier delay modifier, which is just gonna make you shoot very slowly, that in a daily environment, when you're gonna get to something like boss rush, it's just gonna take you way too long to actually kill all of the bosses. Now, sure, all of them are gonna die by basically one shot, but if you miss any of those shots in between, and because sometimes you have to shoot multiple times because certain enemies have multiple stages or have multiple phases or whatever, it's just gonna take you so long to get through it, which means that you're either gonna have to sacrifice some points in exploration so that you're gonna able to get to Hush, or you're gonna have to give up some of those very important objectives. Now, there are no right ways to go about this. Obviously, if you find this item and you think it's fine, just pick it up. But there are certain other items which work really well with Polyphemus, and that's why I think that an item like Polyphemus is very game-changing. It kind of sets a tone for how the run is gonna go, and you have to respect it if you want to have a really good run. Now, luckily for us, at least for me, because I imagine a lot of different runs are gonna go differently, right? That's how Isaac works. Is that this particular run that I had worked really well with Polyphemus. And not just that, I made some clever decisions at some points, and I just got a lot lucky, just super lucky in some other sense. And the very first decision that influenced just how well this run turned out was the fact that I didn't pick up Multidimensional Baby in the very first devil deal that was offered to me. I skipped it, thinking maybe it doesn't really work that well with an item like Polyphemus. I think Multidimensional Baby tends to perform better when you have a run which has a higher not shot speed, but tier delay, lower tier delay, which means a higher tier rate. That's the word I was looking for. Because it's just going to be much more likely that any shot is going to pass through that particular entity and go into something else, right? The chances of actually utilizing Multidimensional Baby is just going to be much higher if you have more shots on screen, as opposed to having some very deliberate shots in the form of the Polyphemus shots that you get after you pick this item up. Now, I decided to skip it because of that reason, and later on I found some angel deals, and angel deals tend to be very bad in general, but remember, we are Apollyon, so we already have the inherent advantage that we can beat an angel statue. It gives us something like 300 points, and then we can suck up the key fragment that it drops. And I was so lucky and fortunate to get two angel deals, which were just ridiculously good. They both had 3 passive items in them, and they both had at least 1 angel statue. The very first angel deal actually had 2 angel statues, which means not only did they get 500, 600 points just for actually beating them, they also left me with 2 items I could suck up. And now, getting passive items when you have Polyphemus is so good, because essentially it provides you with some nice catalyst to actually reduce your tier delay even further, and the damage that you get is not going to be affected by the damage modifiers of all of the other previous items that you found except Magic Marsh. So okay, that didn't make a lot of sense, maybe it sounded a little bit too complicated, but essentially, every time you pick up an item that gives you some damage, it's gonna be reduced. For example, if there are 3 items which gives you 2 damage, I don't think they exist, but just for the sake of argument, The first item is going to give you 2 damage, the second one is going to give you something like 1.9, and the third one is going to give you something like 1.7. So you're going to get some diminishing returns. But with the Void, or at least whenever you suck certain things up with the Black Rune or the Void, that penalty is not going to be affected. You're just going to get that fixed damage increase, and that's going to be it. In the case of Magic Match, you're actually going to get 1.5 damage instead of just a single 1 that you would usually get if you suck passive items up with a Void. So that's another benefit we get from not picking those items up. Now, there were some interesting decisions, and there was the Halo at a certain point. I decided not to pick it up because there were 2 other passive items in that particular room, which means that if I did pick up the Halo, those would despawn, which means I would have less chances of getting any of the stats I really needed. Now, I needed both the tear delay, I needed the range and the shot speed. I needed the tear delay for obvious reasons. Getting that -2 tear delay, which is again a fixed amount, because we have Polyphemus, is just gonna be so much better because it's gonna allow us to shoot faster and just deal a lot more damage, right? Now, why I needed shot speed or range in particular is because we found Cricket's head. And Cricket's body. I always mix those 2 items up even though I know what they do, so just forgive me if I do. I'm talking about Cricket's body now. Now, Cricket's body is a great item because it manages to split your shots in more and essentially increases your DPS against multiple enemies, or if you get lucky, it can even kind of double your damage output against a single enemy. So whenever I find it, I tend to be very excited, but again, it has a very obvious drawback of the fact that it reduces your range to pretty much nothing. So for that reason, I wanted to have a higher shot speed and I wanted to have more range just so that particular item would be more effective. And I'm always thinking about Hush as well, right? I want to get to Hush, I want to have as much range as possible, so I'm actually able to deal damage while I'm avoiding some of his shots. So for that reason, having higher range and higher shot speed just seemed much more beneficial to me because it would have allowed me to be much safer when fighting some of those harder rooms later down the road. And luckily, everything turned out for the better, right? Because we had so much range at the end, we had 2.4 shot speed, which is a ridiculous amount of shot speed. Now, I generally don't like shot speed, but in a run like this one, it doesn't really matter which stats you have. We even picked up Soy Milk at a certain point, but because we had Lump of Coal and we already had so much frigging damage from before, we had 9 damage at 1 tier delay, which pretty much allowed us to melt every single boss that we came across. I also found the Angelic Prism, which just, again, turned this into a ridiculous run, and we're just able to basically curb stomp through every single enemy on the Void. Now, you can see that my score is actually getting pretty high, and a part of that is just because I had so much exploration bonus, I got so many points from beating those angels, but also from the fact that I found Pyro at a certain point, which again just gave me like 1,000 points for free. So this is gonna be an over 50,000 point run on a run that goes to the Void, and if you manage to get that score, that's actually just ridiculously good. Nobody can take this away from you, right? You can expect to get 50,000 points on a run that goes to Mega Satan, and I would already consider that a good score. So to get 50,000 points without Mega Satan in the picture, I think it's just ridiculously good, and this just goes to show just how ridiculous this run was, right? So we managed to beat everyone. The Hollow was the last boss that we had to face here, and because we don't need to fight Delirium here, and because it's usually detrimental, I just decided to quit the run here. And even if you exit through the run, it actually still gives you the points if you weren't aware of what I was doing. So we ended up in the 10th place. We got 50,380 points, which again is very high. My damage penalty could have been very, very much lower. Could be much lower because I did get hit 5 times. That was so unnecessary. I just went somewhere else with my mind and I just got distracted, I suppose. But still, the damage penalty isn't very high on a run like this one. We did get Holy Mantle at a certain point. So overall, it was just a ridiculously good run. There were just so many good things happening at every stage of the way. And I think it was a good indication of how you can use Apollyon to benefit the run that you're trying to build. And that's very important to keep in mind if you want to have a good run on basically any start. You have to know which items you have to know how to interact with other items and other things that exist within the game or within the scope of the game, and when that happens, then I think you can start building a really, really solid run, and I think this one was that. So with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.